Hey there, fellow data and analytics aficionados, and thank you for joining me in today's episode of Caserta's Data Intelligence webinar series. And I'm your host, Remy Rosenbaum. And today we're going to talk about the topic of data management in the cloud. First off, I cannot stress enough how important it is that if you already have any data at all, you're already engaged in data management. So managing this data properly is really crucial to your business and how you use data in order to drive insights and business value. And as organizations like yours are assessing how the global pandemic and uncertain global financial markets have impacted your operations, new possibilities and uncharted routes with new data sources are really becoming the norm for many businesses. And while exploring and implementing different deployment and operational models, the question of data management naturally surfaces while considering how these changes impact your data. And data management must always be a consideration from the get-go. So today I've invited two excellent presenters to delve into data management. And first up, we have Caserta's own Bryce Giesbrecht. And Bryce is a senior solution architect at Caserta. He has developed solutions across many industries and small and large organizations, from startups to the federal government. For the past decade, Bryce has been focused on data-intensive areas, including large-scale data processing, big data, Internet of Things, and analytics. And next up, we have Denodo's Mitesh Shah. Mitesh is a senior cloud product manager and cloud evangelist at Denodo, and he advises on mentor customers in their journey to the cloud, working on big data and data virtualization projects. And a bit of housekeeping, and then we'll get started. Caserta, if you don't already know, is a professional services firm laser-focused on data and analytics engagements. We deliver strategic assessments with actionable roadmaps. We craft innovative designs and architectures and perform advanced implementations for our customers that leverage the latest technologies and proven frameworks and methodologies. We are completely vendor agnostic, and we work with all vendors in the ecosystem to determine what is the best technology stack for our customers. Our teams are led by data scientists and data engineers who all share a relentless dedication and thirst to solving our clients' data and analytics challenges fast. Today's webinar series is designed to give you insight into the hottest technological trends and issues, such as data virtualization and cloud management. And after today's webinar, I encourage you to speak with us about any questions you have on how to apply what you learned today. Our initial consultations are always free, and if we find an opportunity to work together, then we can discuss next steps. If not, we'll gladly point you in the right direction. And after the webinar, we'll send you a recording to the email address you provided. I will personally send you an email. And if you have any questions, you could just reply. And if you have any questions during the webinar, I ask you to please put them in the questions panel. You'll see it in the Go to Our Webinar control panel on your right. And we will answer them during our live Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Bryce, the stage is all yours.
Thanks, Remy. Are you able to hear me?
I am. Bear with me one moment for the presentation.
Thanks, Remy. Yeah, hello, everybody. It's great to be with you today. Did want to talk about data management. You know, Remy kind of stole a little bit of my thunder, but that's understandable. You can't really talk about data management without recognizing that this is a really wide umbrella. So, Remy, if you go to the first slide. So data management is a very wide umbrella. I have a couple definitions here. Wanted to define data management because it's so wide. It's like saying medicine or finance. It's good to define your terms when you're talking about it. So I have a couple different definitions here. The first one being from Oracle. They do a lot of data work. I thought it'd be interesting to see what Oracle had in mind when they talked about data management. And they said, data management is the practice of collecting, keeping, and using data securely, efficiently, and cost effectively. So that's one good idea. That's certainly not, that's certainly true. We certainly wouldn't dispute that. Wikipedia, the great oracle of the internet, has another definition. It's even more vague. It says data management comprises all disciplines related to managing data as a valuable resource. I don't think anybody would disagree with that, but that's really vague. That's all disciplines to managing data. That's a lot. So on our next slide, we have a definition from our good folks at DAMA. And data management, they say, is the development and execution of architectures, policies, practices, and procedures in order to manage the information lifecycle needs of an enterprise in an effective manner. So this is a little more broad. This includes not just data, this includes architectures and policies and practices. And you might pick up through this presentation, my portion of this presentation, this is really key. This is really key. This is a webinar about data management, and we often go straight to technology. But so often, and I'll have some examples scattered throughout, but we cannot have effective data management without policies and support from the executive level all the way down. I really, near the end, I talk more about culture, and I'll just talk about it a little bit now. The whole idea of implementing an effective data management at your enterprise really begins at the top, and it becomes the need for a culture from the top to the bottom is absolutely a necessity. There needs to be this buy-in. There needs to be this core principle from everyone engaged in working with the data, whether it's collecting it, whether it's enriching it, transforming it, or using it, or even making policies about it. That the data needs to be correct. That the data is central to what we do. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So what can we take away from all these three definitions of data management? Let's distill it down into a couple key points. These are very obvious. Data is very, very, very valuable to your organization. Almost everything should be about the data and not the applications. There is a book written by Dave McComb. Dave McComb is out in Colorado, and he has a book about data-centric revolution. That's the name of his book. He's written that book and many others, and he's still writing books. But in the data-centric revolution, Dave is trying to turn the ship on our data management efforts by highlighting that most of the effort in data management has historically been in the design and management of applications, of these systems. They have become the first-class citizens in the enterprise, right? They have captured most of the budget and the efforts of enterprises, not to mention countless meetings, demos, webinars, etc. And what matters is that unless your business is in the business of creating applications, your data is the most important aspect of your business. People like our very own Doug Laney, Mr. Infonomics himself, have effectively conveyed the value of data for organizations in many, many more ways than I will elucidate in this presentation. So while this is sometimes recognized and maybe even embraced, for many, the tools, the processes, and the meetings are still about managing the applications, and often they are legion. So there are challenges. There are challenges, and I suspect that many of you, like me, I like challenges. I don't like being defeated by them. I like identifying them, I like solving them, and I like implementing the solution for them. People are creative, and it is really rewarding to walk away from a challenge knowing that we have solved for it. However, in order to do that, we need to identify the challenges. And some challenges are visible, and some are not. And in the scope of our webinar today, maybe restated, perhaps we could say some data management challenges are obvious, and some are not. The implication being that the obvious challenges get the most effort. They're the squeaky wheel, not the less so obvious challenges. They remain dormant, lurking, waiting to pounce. So I have my own short list of challenges, and they're likely similar to yours. But in the preparation of this webinar, I decided to consult with some of my colleagues to compare notes. And surprise, surprise, master data management was the #1 issue. If you recall, one of our definitions of data management said development and execution of policies, practices. MDM, as well as all of our data management challenges, require both policies and practices. And by policies, I've touched on this before, but I mean executive and business participation and support, including the acceptance of what that entails. Not only for planning and implementation, but also for handling wayward projects or initiatives that come into conflict or seek to skirt the policies and practices that have been put in place. If this happens, this could be an indication that the policies and practices are too tight, they're too rigid, and they're not practical, and they need to be adjusted. A couple of factors of this particular challenge is, as Remy mentioned, the ease and access of getting data has become so easy with the cloud and with public data sets out there, with the technologies that we have for data information, data sharing. It is really easy to bring in information into your system, into your enterprise. This is a very big contributing factor to the challenge of master data management, because we can bring in data sets relating to those things that are important to our business, and we can use those to enrich our data. We can use those to augment other processes and whatnot. But there needs to be control around certain key pieces of information. A story of ours, one of a client that we have, through decades of acquisitions, has collected a large number of systems and data sets. And every single one of them is really important to the enterprise. But over years and years, all of these systems, they reflect the same data. They reflect the same type of information that is really important to this business, but they're all in different formats, right? This is a traditional standard case, right? I'm sure you can probably imagine, if not fully empathize with this scenario, right? The first reaction of many would be, okay, we need to do a data reconciliation or data consolidation project. And that would not be wrong at all. This is something that really does need to be done. But there's something else that needs to be done first. And it's someone, whether it's a person, a C-level person, a dedicated person, a small group of people, they need to be empowered to have ownership and decision-making and authority over all of those systems and data. Like, this, Bryce, this is great, but that's not new. And you're right, this is not new, but this is super important. The reason is, in the cloud, because we can stand up projects and initiatives so quickly, if we don't have the right guidance up front, if we don't have the right direction, the right definition of success, what is acceptable, what is not, how are we going to do this? There are several initiatives that can take off like a shot in the cloud environment and be competing and lead to very complicated situations in the future. So this needs to be done. We did an assessment for this company, and one of the big things that we came out with is you need to hire, you need to basically implement this position within your company, right? A CDO type position, where the data in your organization, the systems that control this data, they need to have an owner, and they need to have someone who can make decisions about that. Before you have that in place, there shouldn't be a whole lot of initiatives that are undertaken, lest they collide with each other, lest they destroy other data, etc. So in tandem with that idea is this idea that if you have someone who is in that position, they have the authority to kind of affix a franchise data label appropriately to certain types of data that's important to your industry. You know, we like the idea of, we know the idea of franchise players in football, right? But the idea is that in organizations, we identify key pieces of information, right? The primal pieces of information that are crucial to the rest of the business. And we affix a franchise data label to those things. And this has implications all the way down the chain. because what this means is that we can enact policies, we can enact procedures, we can enact practices, we can put systems into place that if we actually have this labeled literally, we can have systems literally check to see what kind of data we're working with. And we'll get into more of that later on. But the idea is that we recognize and we label really important data as being key data and important to the organization. I think that, yeah, besides that's so key, and that's not just cloud. It's in every type of platform, whether it's on-prem, in the cloud. But what makes the cloud such an interesting place to work in this and solve these problems is that it is so easy to provision resources and stand things up, and that itself can lead us to our next topic, which is security. Security, like MDM, is one of those topics that you're going to find in all of the data management books, all the literature, all the blog posts, because, I mean, they're obvious, they're visible, they're things that we know about, but yet, just because we're aware of them, it doesn't mean that we're actively addressing them in the right way. And so for security, what are some of the factors that lead to challenges? Well, one we just mentioned, and these are all connected. All of these ideas are connected. There's data everywhere. There's a lot of data. And there's multifaceted data policies that pop up for all of these groups. Multiple user communities, right, are bringing in data. They're able to work with them. There's a multitude of applications that pop up. We have multi-cloud scenarios that are occurring. And so we have a lot of data. And how do we secure this data? Well, that could take its own webinar, a series of webinars to address. But a couple of cloud best practices is to perform regular automated audits of buckets and public-facing IP addresses, right? This is a common problem. This is not new, but it's still super important, and it is a best practice. And in the cloud, because we're able to stand up systems, stand up public-facing systems, stand up storage that's public-facing, this is even more critical in the cloud. And by definition, best practices are proven solution, and they're not new ideas, but they're so important. And we hear story after story about things not happening to safeguard your public-facing data, or accidentally public-facing data. So have a team perform scans of all your buckets, right, and public IPs in your cloud infrastructure. This can be accomplished effectively by using metadata that's available through your cloud provider or cloud providers. If you're multi-cloud, right, you can automate this activity, but it needs to be done. That is a best practice that is so commonly neglected. And wherever it hits the road, and this hasn't been done, you hear about it in the news. And while there's no such thing as bad press, when it comes to security, I would maybe tend to disagree on that. Moving right along, another quick best practice is to prefer an OpenID type provider. I have a story about a solution I worked on where we needed to share data across multiple, the big three automotive providers, right, manufacturers. They all have their own identity solutions. We needed to integrate them all together so that they could access key data that this client of ours was making available, right? So we turned an OpenID solution, right, an OpenID-based solution that would integrate with their compliant identity systems. And we were able to stand up a solution very, very quickly that was able to make all of the access secure and authorized. That is a best practice. You know, we don't need to be rolling our own identity username password solutions anymore. You know, most people, most organizations would thrive and eliminate a lot of busy work in the security realm by just adopting an OpenID framework and building the rest of their security processes in conjunction with that. Another challenge. This is one of the not so obvious challenges challenges is data noise, right? We've talked about a multitude of data, and this is really key. When I was interviewing folks in preparation for this webinar, this was a key concern that kept coming up, right? There's no bridge between the people who need the data, like the analysts and the decision makers, with all the many data sources that possibly exist in your enterprise. If you scan your enterprise and you see a lot of data, but then you talk to the people who are making decisions, they're probably not aware of most of the data sources that are out there. Just because you have a lot of data or even information, if you want to have that discussion, this does not mean that the people who would benefit or even need the data know about it, have access to it, or have timely access to it, right, without a major IT request. You could say that this is actually the central aspect of data management, getting the data to the people who need it. But this overarching concern is often overlooked or lost in the implementation of systems. It gets lost in those weeks. So the point of having data is to use it. And not being able to use it is a tremendous failure of any organization. Keys for this. Best practices. Again, not new. Data discovery layer. Data discovery layers, things like, incorporate things like data dictionary, registration of data sources. Even Joe Caserta has some predictions out there about the data bots doing automated data discovery and registration. It's really important. Also include, lineage information. Again, I was talking to an engineer that I know, and he'd been working on a data platform for a while, and he'd created some really important jobs and was testing with mixed results, only to find out that he'd been using the wrong data source. The data looked like the right data, but it was in fact not what he should have been using. And he wasn't a business analyst. He's an engineer, and he had lower level access to the data than most business users do. And this is particularly insightful because even with that lower level access, he was not able to ascertain that this was not the right data. Imagine a solution that was built and deployed that seemed right most of the time, wrong because it was using the wrong data sources. This is a really key reason to have a data discovery layer. And I realize that developing systems and data platforms often precedes registration of the data. But had the data sources been pre-existing and registered, this would have been a great help in this scenario. And finally, my last kind of not so obvious but highly related point is derived data explosion, right? This is kind of a running theme that it's very easy to get data. And therefore, it's really easy for teams to take that data and drive other data work based off of it, whether it's through just straight enrichment from other data sources, whether it's through machine learning, whatever. The amount of derived data that an enterprise has is growing and growing. And this can create some real challenges. Again, this goes right back to the whole purpose of data management. If this data is not shared with the enterprise, this data can take a path that, if not done in, or at least visible with the whole community, it has the potential to create these pools of data that are not informed by other processes or other data, which can lead to data drift with this derived data. And this can lead to efforts like back reconciliation and things of that nature. And of course, if it's not kept in check and it's not discovered, this system that is using this derived data is operating with wrong data. And that data is being consumed, and that data is wrong, and so on and so on. There are some keys to combating this type of a scenario. Pedigree checks. We talked about lineage. We talked about having a registry, right? But having an enforced pedigree check use of data. This idea of having this franchise data label affixed to certain data would require downstream use of that data to register so other people can understand that this is being used, know that it's being used, and they can also be informed of other uses of it, right? This idea of data discovery and registration. All this data, it's easily created, and it's also informally but effectively socialized. And this data has a habit of getting legs and going all over the place. And by enforcing pedigree checks and registration, a company, an enterprise, can significantly help themselves. Finally, cloud data management opportunities. I want to just highlight just a couple of key points of doing data management in the cloud. I wanted to just quickly, maybe out of order from what the slide says, let's customer 360. Everyone wants customer 360, right? It's kind of one of the holy grails, if you will. But so is System 360, and nobody talks about that because I made that term up. But the idea is that we need to have a comprehensive view of the systems that are using the data. It's important to have a comprehensive view of the data itself, but we need to take a step back and see this comprehensive view of all the data that is being used in an enterprise, in an organization, that impacts your customer 360 view, the things that feed into it, the things that enrich it. Your cloud data platform, it is not a picture. It is not fixed in stone. It is a journey. And I have worked with so many clients on so many projects where initially, there's a fear of doing it wrong. And I would kind of push back on that idea a little bit. Yes, we need to plan. We need to talk to experts. You need to have things thought out, right, and agreed upon. But things can change. We often think of that as for the bad, but things can change for the good. And this includes your infrastructure. This includes your data platform. Things can be corrected. Things can be made better. And so often the opportunities in the cloud for acquiring data so easily also lend themselves to fixing infrastructures, addressing things in infrastructures, moving things around, putting in layers. They exist, and the cloud is a unique place because it makes those so easy. And finally, one of the great opportunities is a unified query layer for your data, an integration layer, if you will. And this helps tremendously in most organizations because, Mitesh is going to highlight several key areas as to why this is, but having a virtual layer, a virtual data layer, and unified query ability is key. You don't have to load data everywhere, right? You don't have to contribute to the exploding data problem. You can keep the data in situ and you can query it where it is, right? And this is a boon to organizations that are acquiring data and creating data. So on that note, I am going to turn it over to my co-host.
All right, thank you so much for the presentation. We're now going to go to Mitesh from Denodo. Mitesh, you should now be able to take the screen.
All right, thank you, Bryce and Remy. Can you see my screen? I hope so.
Looks great.
All right, thank you so much. All right, hello everyone. Hope everyone is staying strong and healthy. And here we are, right at the juncture of summertime, where we want to do a lot of activities and maximize our learning capabilities as well. So kind of continuing this discussion, right, around best practices around data management, and this is really important in terms of how we can really kind of leverage the available tools and techniques that we can put into place, right? Cloud is a big platform. We talk about different things: hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, on-prems, and so forth. But and data is everywhere, right? So how do we really can create and maximize that value of the data that you can use in today's world, like in terms of managing it, in terms of putting it into the best practices and so forth, right? So that's the key, something a discussion point that we are going to walk through some of that. As Bryce pointed out earlier, right, data management is not just about having how you work with data. It's a practice. It's a discipline that you need to build in terms of how you can address some of those issues, right? And just to kind of summarize some of that, uh, the the challenges that we see today, need to support the end users, right? Now, without the end users, no matter how much data you have, what you're doing with the data, it needs to be in a form, it needs to be in a format that can help the end users make faster and accurate decision making, right? And this is where the agility, the business agility, the speed of how you can take deal with those complexity of the data across on-prem cloud, in a hybrid fashion is really important, right? Regulations is another challenge that he talked about in terms of security governance, right? As you're dealing with data, in the cloud, especially, there's so many regulations you need to kind of take into account. GDPR, for example, right? How do you really maximize, the value that you can derive and keeping those, factors in mind when you're dealing with the management of it. And last but not the least, IT cost is important factor, right, for everyone here. Like time is obviously one of the bigger dimensions, but when you look at cost reductions or the skills, right, those are the two main factors that are driving some of the decision making in terms of how you are looking at, tackling this huge amounts of data that you have in your operational environments, in your decision-making environments. And this is really important for us to, kind of look at it in a more broader sense, like how are the tools going to enable that management, make it easier for the users, simplify the regulations aspects around it to kind of help you proceed in that sense. Last but not the least, the end of the day, it's the value. It's also the value depending on what data you can see, right? So if there's data that you are not aware of, that is not exposed, we talk about democratization of the data, and sometimes you don't know. There's different silos of data, for example, and how do you get all that in one umbrella? And that's where you start looking at from an integration standpoint. Okay, so why is this a problem, right? And this is a classic one where the business is kind of checking with ITO, we need something quick, and it's too slow to get the data, or that's always one of the bigger challenges, right? And IT is kind of trying to figure out, what's the best way to kind of address that, what's the best way to serve the business, to be able to help them with that decision making platform, right? And then you have those different types of users. Like, say if I'm just a casual user, you say, oh, you know what, I don't have patience to wait there, and then you'll kind of try to forget it. But then there's power users who are really aspirational, and they are the ones who want to try and get ahead, and so they say, okay, yeah, you know what, I'll just do it myself, don't worry. And it just kind of goes into that conversation mode where there's a push and pull between the business and IT trying to solve the bigger picture. And then comes the business the business line of business, right? Meaning for them the time is value. Obviously they want to do it, they'll say, okay, we'll take the ownership, we'll do it ourselves, and instead of trying to get. So as part of this, you can see this culture impact as well, as Bryce pointed out. That's very important, as you're trying to manage the data, how the teams interact with each other, how you are planning this out, from a business standpoint is really important. Training is another big angle, to this, right? How the IT is being trained with the new, technology. The cloud is moving at such a fast pace that you need to, kind of understand how you can really maximize with the right tools and techniques, right? And that's really an important factor. So that's where, we start looking at, okay, we have a scenario where, data management, we understand the challenges, we understand that, how we kind of simplify that, and trying to kind of looking at the bigger landscape of data across the organization, right? We want to try and minimize the manual access to the different systems, right? As Bryce was pointing out, System 360, right? What are the different systems that are handling my data? From an IT standpoint, how can I kind of integrate that data so that I can provide the right decision making, insights, and to be able to leverage that data and integrate that at the same time. It could take too long, right? We That's what the argument you were seeing on the earlier slide. Okay, if it takes too long, the users run out of patience, right? The business users would kind of say, okay, it's not helping us, rather than making this uh, even more challenging. So with all those factors that you're looking at in terms of how the data is, the solution is, and again, this is one of the solutions, but obviously, you're trying to make this data that is accessible to your consumers, and also you're trying to kind of get a single view across all your disparate data sources by building an abstraction layer, right? An abstraction layer is the one that acts like a middleware that connects your data consumers with your disparate data sources in a real-time fashion, because the data is moving so fast, it's growing so fast, right? And you need something that's not static, that's not something that you depend on refreshing it overnight and stuff like that. You want something that's more real time, and how you can really help the modernization of your architecture. Your data driven architecture is dependent on that real time access to the data, and this is where the data abstraction layer comes in. And that's what the data virtualization platform is all about. That's where you take your data and you try to present that to the users in a way that it's easily accessible, and able to do that. So let's dive a little bit more into what's data virtualization and how it can really be something, like something that you would be, create an appetite for you to go out and try if you've not really done that before. Okay. Uh, this is a classic one from Gartner. In terms of data virtualization, they said that it can be used to create virtualized views, integrated views, right? Virtualized integrated views of data in memory rather than executing data movement. And it provides that abstraction layer about that physical implementation of the data, so the users kind of have make it a little bit more transparent from them in terms of how they are looking at all this, right? So the key factor here is there's no trying to limit the data movement, right? And which means you're not trying to replicate all that. There's use cases for replication, of course, but again, this is where you want to try and maximize the integration that can provide faster value to the business, right? So that's where data virtualization can really help you. So let's look at how does it work. Okay, so as I was talking about earlier, you have your enterprise users, they're coming in, trying to get access to the data through your BI tools, your reporting portals, your web services, enterprise data, ESBs, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and that's where the Denodo data virtualization engine, think of it as a relational database, that serves all your needs across all those different silos that you're looking at. So what happens is Denodo helps you connect. Okay, so all your data sources, it acts more like an semantic layer, okay, which kind of creates a data abstraction. It acts as an abstraction source for your data, which means you have, Denodo can store all that metadata of all your connections in Denodo, right, as a data virtual layer. And that's the step one, like you gather all that information. The next is you create the derived views out of it. So which is where your business logic, how you're creating a unified view, how you're aggregating your data for, from a warehousing perspective, where, you're taking all that data, trying to present it in a business usable format. Okay. And then you kind of expose those views to your end users who can connect through, JDBC, ODBC, or REST or web services, and kind of consume that data. So it's a way where you can, query the data through Denodo. The users don't have to worry about those 10 different data sources, where, et cetera, et cetera. It's a transparent to the users in terms of the physical existence of the data. All they see is a single view of that data that you are presenting through the abstraction layer in Denodo. All right, and that's how you can quickly get. Denodo does the heavy lifting in terms of connecting, aggregating and doing the push down. So when you're writing a query, when you're writing a report to get all that information, it will push down, take advantage of the processing capabilities of your data sources where they're lying, and then gather all that information in a very intelligent way to help you that, right? To help you with that. Uh, it's important to realize that also, you look, as I said earlier, it's more, you can look at it as a relational database, but it has some intelligent optimizer capabilities built into it. So you can, query into Denodo. It will push down the queries, bring the data back to you in real time. So you don't have to move data and try to work with that as well. And then it provides you the surrounding ecosystem with how you can manage the security. So even if you're looking at how you want to manage the security across all these different data sources, you can manage that through Denodo itself. That's a huge benefit in terms of how you are managing a single layer of your security across all your data sources. So it acts like a centralized security standpoint. uh, you can do a lot more in terms of data caching, depending on how close your data is, right? So when you're talking about on-prem cloud, where the data gravity is, you can intelligently build some caching mechanisms in Denodo itself, where you can quickly cache data that you're frequently using and take advantage of those. So this is just at a high level, right? We could do a deep dive, obviously, in a different session, but kind of give you a big picture there in terms of how you can handle this from a data virtualization standpoint. Okay. Um, and this coincides with the logical data warehouse definition, what Gartner has been proposing, right? So here what you're seeing is you have your source data. You have, you're working across all these different ways to, whether you're building a data warehouse, you have operational systems, you have all these different, applications that are, working in your ecosystem. And that is where having that virtual layer, the data access layer on top of that kind of simplifies a lot of the pain points that you might have to go through, not having to worry about kind of how you're connecting them individually, how you're trying to aggregate that data and so forth. So this is exactly where the logical data warehouse concepts kind of fits into how data virtualization can help you with that. Okay, so that's a classic use case for data virtualization. Okay, so here's another one, right? This is, again, a prediction from Gartner where they're saying through 2022, 60% of all the organizations will implement data virtualization as one of the key delivery style. So if you have not started thinking about it, now is the perfect time to start and understand, how you can leverage data integration, how you can accelerate your data integration capabilities and modernize our architecture using data virtualization, right? So that's one of the key important factors there. Uh, when you start looking at, what are the key use case categories that you can support through this? Obviously, BI and analytics, right? We see a lot of users who are trying to, compare. We're trying to connect through all these different types of applications, right? And BI tools are more like are meant for ad hoc, visualization type of things. Although they can gather all the data, but the main function is to kind of do presentation, visualization. Uh, Data virtualization is built, the Denodo data virtualization is built with, key capabilities around performance as well, and it acts as a semantic layer. So that's one of the key fundamental differences when you're starting looking at, can I use my BI tool? Yes, you could, but again, if you're going deeper in terms of how you can leverage that through, the virtual layer, it kind of makes it a lot more sense. Okay. Data governance, obviously, you can manage row level security, column level security. You can connect, manage how your applications are coming into that single layer. That's one of the other key use cases. API services, that's one other classic one. With the modern architecture, you want to kind of make this so streamlined, easy for connecting across applications, and how you can, use DV, data virtualization, as a form of an API. It acts as an API layer that you can expose that as a web service for consumption. So data as a service, another classic use case there, right? Machine learning, big data, cloud solutions. Again, you can go on. And in terms of how they really kind of create that value in terms of, accelerating your access to the data, accelerating how you can manage that data in a much more hybrid fashion without having to, kind of move things around. So let's look at another classic one, just looking at the time here. Uh, so data lake, right? We all have been hearing data lake, right, in terms of as a repository for all data, right? So it makes sense in a way like, okay, I'm going to try and use my data lake, uh, to kind of put all my data into that in the cloud, and that's a classic one. But at the same time, you want to understand, what are the challenges with that? Are you trying to put all the data into one? Is it even worth the cost of doing that to a certain degree, right? Meaning the time and effort you would spend upfront in terms of putting all your data, and at the same time you're growing other sets of data as well. So in terms of managing security, in terms of managing the cost, that could be a big challenge there. So there is a huge upfront investment in terms of it's a questionable ROI when you're building that. But again, it's a novel concept. It's where you can leverage data lake to address a lot of your other challenges. There is a maintenance cost associated with it, right? And also there is risk of inconsistencies in how your data could be. At the same time, you're looking at the time to market. So basically, the complexity could increase, and you could also have the security as a challenge in terms of how you're managing that. So what you're looking at here is even if you're building a data lake, that's perfectly fine. Denodo can complement that as a virtual layer, which helps you connect to your data lake through the other data sources that are constantly growing and building across that. So whether you're looking at it from a security standpoint, whether you're looking at it, from that angle as well, it kind of complements the data lake in itself. And instead of having to put, 5 different pieces of the puzzle together, you can use Denodo in front of your data lake to kind of simplify the security, the time to market, and so forth. Okay. So here's exactly a use case scenario where Denodo does not is a substitute for data warehouse or data lake, but it helps you aggregate all that easily through a data access layer in that form in a logical data warehouse, right? So you're trying to kind of enable all that data across all your data sources plus the other data sources that you might kind of be growing with, in that logical fashion. And it kind of minimizes the ETL, of course. So there's use cases where Denodo can also be used as an ETL. So when you're trying to combine all the data through ETL, the ETL has to do the heavy lifting. You can put Denodo in front of ETL, which means that ETL can leverage Denodo and take that all that data, pump that into a data warehouse as well. So that's another one. So best practices, quickly, I'll spend a couple more minutes here. When you're looking at data management, architecture is key, right? In terms of where your data location is, how you're scaling, taking the advantage of the cloud to scale your data, right? Sizing in terms of your data volume, which is constantly increasing, right? Your data concurrency of your queries, how your users are taking advantage of that is important. And, you could use Denodo to data virtualization layer in the cloud itself to kind of talk to each other on-prem and cloud, and kind of make that a lot more streamlined. Okay. With the number of data sources that are supported through data virtualization, it helps you manage this in a lot more logical and simpler way to connect all your SaaS applications, all your different types of data that you might have. We have like 100 plus different connectors that you can connect and build that semantic layer. And performance is one of the key strengths, in terms of how we can push on the query, use, caching capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. One of the other things that you might be interested in is, when you're looking at cloud, there's a cost involved, right? You're pumping data into the cloud, but as soon as the data starts leaving the cloud, there is a big cost to that. So Denodo can really simplify the way you're managing your costs in terms of, limiting the amount of data that needs to go back and forth. So if you have an application that is communicating in a hybrid cloud fashion, trying to, combine data across, on-prem and cloud, and you want to try and minimize the data that are moving out from that point onward. So that's where Denodo can simplify some of that as well. Here's another classic use case where migration to the cloud, right? So you are doing that classic, the journey to the cloud. And as part of the journey, it can act like a data hub, right? So all your third-party applications, your BI users, they don't have to worry about, if you're moving from, say, your data center, like say Oracle, or you're moving to, say, something in the cloud like Redshift or SQL data warehouse. The Denodo itself makes it transparent to the users of when you're changing the connection. So all the users see is your semantic layer, the views that you have built, the business views. You can point those connections to your different data sources as you're migrating to the cloud, and it makes that a lot more easier. So basically, it absorbs the changes and makes the migration a lot more transparent to the users, right? So this is a very classic use case. We have seen a lot of users who are using, the Denodo as a means to migrate. It's not doing the actual migration of your data, but it helps your application in terms of running that without any disruption. So that's the value of that. SaaS APIs, you could abstract the SaaS APIs, when you're trying to kind of build that connecting through different layers of, different types of SaaS APIs as well. So in a kind of summary, right, in interest of time, let's do a quick recap. The key benefits here is the faster time to value from your data, right? Reduced data integration costs. So DV is a form of your data integration. Replication is another form. You could use ETL as another form, CDC, chain data capture. So you're looking at all these different ways of data integration, but where's the big value bang for the buck, right? What is much more agile, where you can take advantage of the less number of skills needed to kind of manage your application. So you're just managing one application instead of all these other ones. So that's the real value, right, in terms of managing and the security aspects around it. As a next steps, I would recommend, if you have familiar with somewhat of this data virtualization and you want to learn more, the 14-day free trial of Denodo's website is a very, easy to kind of get started with. We will support you with that if you need any help there, but, that's easy for you to get started. We support all the 3 cloud platforms, and, you could work that out through that. And just a quick heads up, next week there is a quick webinar around cloud migration. So if cloud migration is in your minds in terms of how you are, take advantage of that journey to the cloud, there's an experts panel that you could, kind of hear from the experts around what they're doing in the field. We have different, users, we'll have customers, partners, all, part of that. So feel free to join there and register that up there as well. And with that, thank you very much for listening, and I'll send it over to Remy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mitesh. That was excellent. And although we don't have any time left for Q&A today, I do implore everyone to sign up for the cloud panel with Denodo, where you'll be able to ask your questions to a wider panel. I'll be sending out an email following the processing of the webinar, and I'll send the link so you can click on that and easily register for the panel next Thursday. Thank you guys for the presentations. Thank you everyone who attended today, and we'll see you next time. Take care.